physically, financially, and probably some other ways as well. We talked about living in a past that can't be changed. We talked about keeping commands that were never given. And we talked about pouring into a cause that's not your calling. We dealt with that one last week, and we saw how we need to be more discerning about what we say yes to, right? More discerning about protecting our time and our energy and making sure that we're moving in the ministry that God actually has for us. And so tonight, as I told you last week, we're going to be looking at room number 5. And this room is keeping something that's dead or dying on life support. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the ways we do that in our lives, what that looks like, some of the drain that it is, how do we, and I want to start in a moment. These first few slides, I really want to look at some scriptural, some biblical principles that will help to kind of reset us from this type of mentality. Okay, so first of all, what are some situations in life when you have found yourself doing this, or you've seen some other people in your life doing this? Some things that have run their course, and yet we still keep pouring energy into them. Some things that are dead, and we just continue to kind of flog that dead horse and expending our time, our energy, burning our mental and spiritual power on some of these situations. What do you think? What have you seen? What have you done? What will you confess to? Anybody? What are your thoughts on this one?
I got one.
Yeah.
I had a friend in high school, and I thought we were so close, we were like sisters. And then something happened, and felt like I got stabbed in the back, and I continued to kind of nurse this.
Okay.
And finally, my mom sat me down one day and said, Sandy, you need to look at the big picture. And once I sat there and thought about that for a while and looked at the big picture, I decided I had better friends than that.
Okay. Good. Great example. That was actually one of the at the top of my list. So I had friendships that have run their course, right? Friendships that have run their course. So Sandy was talking about how she had a friend, some things happened, there was a falling out, and how she continued to try and nurse this relationship. And I like that phrasing, right? Continue to try and nurse this relationship along for some time before her mom challenged her and got her to kind of open her eyes. Look, I don't really need this. It's not really adding any value to my life. A lot of times relationships just kind of run their course, and that's that. And it's okay to move on. It's okay to let some of these relationships that have run their course go, right? But if we're not careful, we can find ourselves pouring and pouring and pouring, chasing people down, forcing friendships, right? Forcing relationships. And not only do we do it with friends, but we also do it with family sometimes too, right? And that's a big one. And I think we, as people of God, as Christians, I think, and I hope this series has kind of been helping you, see some things and realize some things and open your eyes. Just look at some things a little bit differently. And I'm not in this series of lessons telling you that you definitely need to cut this person off, or you need to end that, or you need to do this or do that. It's a long process of discernment and prayer and seeking the Spirit on some things. And so don't take this as you need to do this, you need to do that. But I'm hoping that at the very least, this series is at least empowering you to look at some things differently, to question some things, right? to really go into prayer and study and seeking the Spirit on, okay, I may have always been taught this, or these people that I value are pushing me in this direction, or I've always believed in this certain way, but is that necessarily so? And can I rethink this? Under the guidance of the Spirit, can I go a different direction? Do I have permission to change my life in some areas? And so I hope you're at least finding permission through this series to just at least rethink some things.
I think you have to really think about it when it comes to family, because you kind of always thought, family stays together.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes some family do need to let them go.
Yep. And you would be really surprised. That's actually number 2 on my list. I got my notes on my PowerPoint slide here. And I wrote family relationships that are strained and straining you. And like Mama Flo said, a lot of times we get pressure very often from other family members to stay in contact. You got to keep that relationship going. Blood is thicker than water. Family is all you, at the end of the day, family is all you got. Well, do I really need them if they're toxic? Right? Do I really need this relationship? And you would be really surprised. One thing, I've done a lot of pastoral counseling over the years, and I've even grown in my understanding and things that I say to people. And one thing I say to people now, and I've found it that it's really liberating for them. And the response that I've gotten back from people is almost like a really big sigh of relief. And the thing that I tell them is that you get to choose who's in your life and to what degree. You're grown, right? You're a grown woman, you're a grown man, and you get to choose who's in your life and to what degree. All right? Now, again, certain relationships kind of have an asterisk by them. I'm not telling you to, put your spouse away. I'm not telling you to kick your kids to the curb, especially if they're still dependent children, right? You can't, if they're 14 and they still, so obviously there's an asterisk on certain relationships. But I'm talking about, listen, you guys are grown now. Y'all in your 40s, your 50s. If you ain't vibing spiritually and emotionally with your sister, why are you forcing it? Right? I got I won't say, I got a family member, I won't get too specific, but we just, it got tense and it got strained, and, I just got to the point, if it's going to be strained, why am I straining myself to, it's okay, right? And I think we need to give ourselves permission to let some things run their course, all right? So if it's a burden, if it's a strain, if you're forcing it, the question is, why are you forcing it? Make sense? Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure you see them in heaven. You don't want to burn in hell. And you try and you beg God to please open the right door, close the wrong ones, put the words in my mouth that will come out into their heart and brain, and just keep trying and trying and trying and trying. And I have learned that it's time to write this out. God, this is in your hands.
Yeah. Right.
To come to you and to be able to accept that I'm not failing them.
Exactly.
I'm opening the big door for them to just fall into.
Right. Great point. If you didn't hear what Kay said, she said coming to the realization, very important, that I'm not failing this person, right? If I'm not the one that can help them, or if I need to pull back from this relationship and just give this person over to God, that's not a failure, right? That's not me being a bad friend or a bad brother or a bad cousin or whatever. Sometimes you just have to get to the point, again, through prayer and discernment. I'm not telling you to just on a whim kick people to the curb and abandon relationships. Not what we're saying. But after prayer and discernment and spiritual searching, it's okay to turn certain things over and know that this is not a failure on my part. This is not an indictment on my character or my love for the person or anything else. Amen?
So, off of what Kay was saying first is, like, for example, with my own biological children that I have, I'm too close to the situation that it, instead of forcing relationship with God on them, because that's what it became an argument.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to give it to God and say, I'm going to step back. And now my prayer is to allow someone else to step in because I'm too close.
Right.
And the other thing is it's okay for us to love our family from afar.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you don't like them. Doesn't mean you wish bad will for them. You pray for them and you love them from afar, and that's okay. And I've had to learn that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes.
Sometimes God waits for us to totally give it to Him before we respond
Mm-hmm.
and answers that prayer. He wants us to know that it comes from Him and it was not our doing.
Exactly. Very great point. Yes.
I mean, relationship with the opposite person, either a man or a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes when you try to get with a relationship with somebody, and that person is kind of not answering, not talking to you, or testing you, or whatever, you might say, "What's the point?" you
Yep.
know?
Yep. Knowing when enough's enough. And one thing we're actually teaching both of our kids, but especially our daughter, listen, don't chase anybody. If you gotta chase them, if it's one-sided and you gotta, no, it's not worth it, right? So knowing when, hey, enough's enough, I've done what I can, and this is no longer healthy for me, it's no longer good for me, and hey, let it be what it is. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, you.
I can't, this isn't exactly the same thing that we're talking about, but in a way it is. On Facebook lately, they've been arguing about the CFC, they call us.
Okay.
And all other kinds of religions, and quoting scripture and getting even nasty to each other. And it frustrates me. I ended up writing a whole thing about it. And I didn't use any scripture or anything. I just said, arguing is definitely off the board. You're not supposed to use that.
Yeah.
It's getting more and more because they've got these groups that keep forming the churches.
Right. Right. I've had to completely, some of those I've just had to completely ignore, and yeah, just draws you in, and it's like right. And you want to say something, and it's like, nah, I'm just, nah. Tyler, was your hand up, or were you stretching?
I was pondering your question.
Okay.
I was putting it in my head. So, pertaining to something dying, what if the something that's dying is a marriage? What do
Okay.
you do then? Like, is it the whole dynamics change? You don't just give up, or what do you do then if it's a dying marriage?
Yeah, and that is a whole other class and study. So yeah, that's a deep one, but it's worth thinking about and considering under this topic, right? So what does that mean? The spiritual death of a marriage, even if there's adultery and fornication. I know some people will encourage people to fight for it, continue, even if someone's betrayed you. And again, that's your choice, that's your personal journey with God, but praying for discernment. To me, that's the main thing, is always, above all else, and continually seeking spiritual discernment. Lord, what is it you want me to do? Is this a situation where It's not necessarily dead or dying. It's just sick, right? It just needs something to make it healthy again. And there's something I can do to empower that? Or is this a situation where anything and everything that I can do isn't going to affect any positive change? So again, that process of discernment is crucial. So let me touch on a few more before I look at these next few slides. So we touched on a few of the relationship ideas. Here's another one. How about a church that's on its last leg? Anybody ever been a part of one? Yeah. So those are some really interesting situations. I know some people that are a part of those situations now, right? And it's very challenging, especially looking at it from the outside, where I think I have objective eyes versus them kind of being in it and not being able to really see it clearly for what it is. And I'm looking at it like, oh, would y'all just go on and, oh, this thing is done. Just, it's a wrap. Turn the lights off. Let's go. Let's do something else. Let's do something different. But kind of wrestling with how do you even deal with that with family members and other, friends that are in that situation. But that's a big one. All right. And I'll kind of even touch on some things specific to that throughout the lesson and some other, church-related situations, such as a ministry that served its purpose. There's another one, okay? Sometimes we continue to pour and pour and pour into some ministries that have actually done their job. They've served their purpose. They did what God put them there to do, and they actually did it 20 years ago. and we're still doing this ministry the same way, and it's like, okay, maybe this isn't really doing what it used to do. Maybe it served its purpose, and maybe it's time to move on. And there's some telltale signs of that too.
Ministries, you might need a new leader involved.
New direction, new leadership. Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and we've done this here, we have to give it a quiet funeral. No, I'm serious. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When the ministry is run its course, for instance, bus ministries, it served its purpose. We had a school of preaching years ago. It served its purpose, but we had to give both of those a funeral.
Yeah.
And it's tough on some people, but that's a ministry, and that's serving God the way He wants it.
Right. Exactly. What does God want? What's He trying to accomplish in this moment, in this time, right? And that might not be the same thing as it was, 5, 10, 20 years ago. Here's another example. I'm just throwing some out. A job situation that's done all it can for you, and you've done all you can for it, right? Sometimes we hold on to situations. It could be a job, maybe an organization that we're a part of, some group that we belong to, and you've been trying to feed it and keep it going and pour all you can into it because it's a good thing and it's been a part of your life for a long time. But at a certain point, it may be worth just realizing it's over, and that's okay, right? All of these things, it's okay. And I'm going to show you why it's okay. So here's a few things scripturally that I want you to take into consideration as you think about these things, as you help other people in your life with these type of situations. Here's 3 biblical principles that I think will ease this a little bit, right? Give us a little bit more faith and confidence to be able to give some things some funerals, right? To lay some things to rest and move on to what's next. So first thing is recognizing that some blessings have an expiration date. Okay? You have to understand that. And I'm going to put Ecclesiastes 3 up here. I actually want you to turn there in your Bible because I didn't put the whole thing up here, but I want you to hear these and see these phrases that he uses. Because a lot of pretty much all of them, they're very relevant, right? This is stuff we deal with every day. These are situations that we're going to face in our lives, just, phrased in sort of metaphorical ways. So I want us to just listen to them for a minute. Ecclesiastes 3, beginning of verse 1. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. So underline, highlight, circle that. The season, right? We don't very often acknowledge this, and we don't spend a lot of time in church contexts and even as leaders and ministry leaders acknowledging and accepting the seasonal nature of all of life, including church life and ministry life, right? We just want to keep doing something until the cows come home, right? But everything in life is seasonal. And the wisdom of Ecclesiastes here puts us in that mindset. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. You could even substitute the word season for time, right, as we're reading these. A season to scatter stones and a season to gather them. A season to embrace and a season to refrain from embracing, right? We talked about that. Relationships, sometimes they run their course, and it's okay to let go, to refrain from embracing. I always looked at that as, sometimes somebody just, there's a time somebody is your friend and there's a time they become your enemy. It's not even necessarily that hardcore, right? It's not necessarily that dramatic. Sometimes, like we said, sometimes you just outgrow some people, right? As you mature spiritually, as you grow as a person, we just don't have what we used to have. And so a time to refrain from embracing. A time, listen to this one, a time to search and a time to give up. That one kind of hit me. I haven't read these in a while, and just kind of going back through them. And this is the NIV. Anybody got the King James? Because I'm curious to see how that's phrased in the King James. I don't. That's beginning of verse 6. Anybody got King James?
It's a time to get and a time to lose and a time to keep and a time to cast away.
Okay, time to keep and a time to cast away. Time to get and a time to, what was it, give up or lose?
Cast away.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. And the NIV phrasing of that really hit me. A time to search and a time to give up. At what point is the season to release, to relinquish, to stop looking, right? To let go of that. That's challenging, right? That's hard, especially if, to me, it brings to mind the idea that somebody is lost or somebody needs help or somebody has gone astray. And there's a time to seek or search and a time to stop looking, a time to kind of just give up. Kind of deep, right?
Yeah, this came with a time to tear down and time to build. You look at we had 3 stadiums that were not in the best shape. Could the city, can Detroit did something with, like Joe Louis? Could they redo something? Can they redid something with Tiger Stadium? Could they have done something with the Superdome? And they decided, these places are way too bad shape.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to upgrade.
Yeah. And that's interesting. That's an interesting analogy. If you didn't hear him, Brian was talking about the stadiums, right? Even Detroit, Pontiac Silverdome and Joe Louis and all those and other cities have had similar situations. And that's a good thought, right? At what point does pouring into this old structure become less effective than actually tearing it down and building something new. And that's interesting analogy for our lives, right? To maintain this old thing, it's dilapidated, it's requiring so much maintenance, it can't be updated for modern technology, right? If you build a building now, you can wire it for Wi-Fi and all the different stuff, and to do that to an old building might not even be cost effective, right? Handicap accessibility, right? We didn't build buildings for that back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, right? And so at what point does continuing to pour into this old thing become just not, doesn't even make sense anymore? Last couple, verse 7, verse 8, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So very important to understand the seasonal nature of life. Now, the question I want us to think about for a couple minutes is, what are some of the dangers of failing to acknowledge the seasonal nature of life? Living as though everything should just last forever and not recognizing that God made it this way, that things run their course. Things have an appointed time, and eventually that appointed time runs out. That's God's design, right? That's how he made things to be. And so by refusing to acknowledge that, or by ignoring that in our lives, what are some of the consequences of that? Spiritually, physically, emotionally, whatever.
One of them is to get caught in a cycle.
Okay.
Realizing that you're missing your opportunity, so you're pretty much falling off and you're missing your shot to make a change.
Good. Missing, staying stuck in some ruts and cycles, and missing the opportunities, right? Missing the new things, the new doors that God is opening, right? So failing to recognize the seasonal nature of life will have us missing God-given opportunities.
Become stagnant and you quit growing.
Okay, good. You just become stagnant, you stop growing. Absolutely. Brian?
Back with what Terry said, in relationship, when you are, if you are got two people that you like, but one of them not there, but this other person is there, you gotta make a decision. Do you want to wait for this person who don't care, or do you want, if you are waiting on this person to make up his or her mind on you, you might miss out on the person who wants to be with you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good one. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Yep.
Eventually, there's a rude awakening that you haven't been living in God's will, and it's just your own.
Okay.
Then you realize your life has passed you by.
Okay. Good. That's a big one, right? The spiritual consequences of possibly months and years, months turn into years, years turn into decades of living outside of God's will for your life, right? And waking up one day and it's like, man, how much have I poured into this dead thing when God all along was pointing me over here, or giving me this thing, or blessing me with that, and I was so fixated in my own will on that thing, and that can be spiritually devastating. Good one. Yeah.
Emotional, you could be sad, you could be sad,
Okay.
depression, anxiety, fear,
Mhm.
all those things that go with your emotions due to you staying in an unhealthy relationship, regardless what it is.
Good.
Spiritual, financial, whatever.
Good. So the emotional toll that it takes can be very big. Excellent. So here's the second biblical principle I want to show you. First of all, some blessings have an expiration date. Everything God gave you wasn't intended for you to just enjoy and have and be a blessing for the rest of your life, right? Some have an expiration date, and it's okay. Here's the second one. What God was doing then, he may not be doing now. And we got to be cool with that. Okay? So somebody get Isaiah 43. I want to read verses 18 and 19. Isaiah chapter 43, verses 18 and 19. So understanding that sometimes God will shift his activity. Okay? Now we know that God will never change his what? His will. He'll never change what else? His nature, right? He is the same yesterday, today, forever. He is who he is.
Are we just opening up to Isaiah?
Say again.
Are we just opening up to 18 and 19 in Isaiah?
Yeah, Isaiah 43.
Yeah. You want me to read it or no?
Yeah, just 1 second. Again, God's nature never changes. His will never changes. His word never changes, right? But at times, his activity in the world will shift, okay? In other words, God will do something for one season, and then once he's done with that, once he's accomplished that purpose, he'll start to do something different, all right? The problem is sometimes we stay working on what God was working on back then and not what he's working on now. We don't shift our activity when God shifts his activity. And Isaiah 43 is a good example because remember, Isaiah is prophesying. He's telling some things that are going to happen long before they happen. And one of the things, particularly in this context, is the first of all, you have the downfall and the judgment and the exile of Israel. But he not only foretold that, he foretold the restoration as well. And that's what these verses are about. Go ahead, read those for us.
Remember ye not the former things, neither consider all the things of old.
Okay, stop right there. He says, forget the former things, right? Get out of the past things. Don't even remember and don't think about what happened before. Keep going.
Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert.
Good. I like that image of the river in the desert, right? So the previous situation was going to be for Israel a desert season, right? The exile, the punishment, the judgment of God, dryness, death, pain, suffering, hunger, all that. But he also says, eventually, I'm going to make rivers start to flow in that wilderness. Rivers start to flow in that desert. So this new thing that I'm doing, so God shifts his activity. For a season, it's punishment, it's judgment, but now it's going to be restoration, refreshing times. So that's just one example, and I want us to understand that we have to be more discerning, right? More God-focused and spirit-attuned than we are sometimes, to make sure that when God is shifting his activity, we don't keep doing the things that we were doing and that were working and that we needed to do in the previous season. Does that make sense? If you're part of the remnant, life and your relationship with God and what you're all about is very different in the wilderness season than it is in the refreshing season. I think we were studying Nehemiah a while back, if you remember that. And remember, Nehemiah said, look, it's time out for crying and weeping and lamenting, right? He says it's time to shift. We're done with that. The exile is over, and now is a time for rejoicing. Let's celebrate. Go kill the fatted calf and feast with your family and friends, because God has shifted his activity, and now there needs to be a corresponding shift in our behavior, in our response, in our activity for this particular season. Does that make sense? So Nehemiah is a great example. I don't remember what exactly, the chapter and verse was, but that sticks in my mind. He says, it's time out for the weeping and the mourning, right? Now is rejoicing time. A shift is taking place, and let's keep up with God as he moves. All right, because if he's restoring and refreshing and reviving, and we're still back here weeping and mourning and lamenting, how's God going to see that, right? I'm doing this new thing for you. I'm blessing, I'm restoring, I'm reviving. The thing that goes with that is praise and joy and worship, right? Not lamenting and weeping and mourning anymore. And listen, church, we don't talk about it very much, but there is a time and a season for weeping and lamenting and mourning, right? We, every now and then we might need to start having a good old-fashioned lament service, right? The whole book of Jeremiah and what's it called? What's his other book? Lamentations, right? The weeping prophet. So there's a season for that, right? It goes along with judgment and repentance and God awakening you to some things that are wrong in your life. So there's a time and a season for that, but then there's a time and a season for rejoicing and worship and celebration. So making sure we keep up with God as he shifts his activity. And here's the third principle. It is all about the giver. We are just stewards of the time, energy, and gifts that are on loan to us. Okay, so we got to remember that. And so starting to live with more of a consciousness of the fact that God deserves a return on his investment in me. Does that make sense? He's bought me, first of all, with the blood of Jesus. And then secondly, he's given me the time that he's given me. He's given me the energy that he's given me. He's given me the gifts and the talents and the abilities that he's given me. And for all of that giving, the giver deserves a return on his investment. All right? So, and here's the kicker for this lesson that we're on. Does it really honor him to spend these gifts, this time, this energy, these abilities that he's blessed me with, beating a dead horse? Does that really honor him? Right? Pouring into, like we saw last week, a cup with a hole in the bottom of it. Does that honor the giver? And is that really going to give him the return on his investment that he's looking for from my life? So the question we always got to ask ourselves when we're looking at situations, we're looking at relationships, we're looking at, even church and spiritual situations, is this dead? Is this dying? What does the giver deserve to gain from what he has given me? And that, I think, if we really become more conscious of that, ask that question, ponder that, you'll kind of see, man, I can't stay here and keep doing what I'm doing. This isn't giving God his glory. This isn't giving him anything back. Nothing's happening from this that should be happening that he deserves for how good he's been. We got to do better than this. I got to do better than this. This isn't worth, my time, energy, and gifts, which are from him. That makes sense? Okay. Yep.
It reminds me of Matthew 25 when Jesus tells the story of the three servants.
Mm-hmm.
One who buried it.
Right.
And he called them lazy, wicked people.
Yep. And always remember, we're going to have to give an account. That's why I love that image, right? The loan. Guess what you got to do with a loan?
Pay it back.
You got to pay it back eventually with interest, right? That's why giving him the one back that he gave me, that's not good enough. I blessed you. I trusted you. You know, I had faith in you. Why didn't you have enough faith in me to put it to work and give me a return on my investment? I don't just want it back. I want more than I gave you. All right? So we're going to have to give an account. And if we keep that in mind, then we can't in good conscience continue to pour God's stuff, all right? This is his stuff, into something that's dead or dying. So, I want to look at some signs it may be time to pull the plug. Okay? And I know this analogy might be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Because I know I've been there, you know, with some loved ones, and so I'm certainly not making light of those situations where we do have to make that serious decision. But I think it gives us something spiritual to think about, right? I think is a very, very apt analogy. It's a hard decision, right? First of all, it's a hard decision to, you know, take somebody off of life support. It's a very, very difficult decision. And so I'm going to give you a few things to think about when it comes to what we're talking about. First of all, the breath of the Spirit is gone, and the ventilator is doing all the work. All right, so, and I put our two words up there. Ruach is the Hebrew word, and pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. Both of those words are translated spirit in the English Bible, and they both literally mean breath. Okay, so even when we're looking at that in the physical sense, right, and we see that person on the ventilator, their breath is gone, right? They're not even breathing on their own anymore, and that ventilator is doing all the work. So what are some situations where that happens in our lives, right? One of them, I think, is when we talked about this idea of a dead or dying church, right? Or a dead or dying ministry. The Spirit is no longer there. Revelation 2 and 5, write that verse down if you're taking notes, because there's a really important image that Jesus gives to, must be the church at Ephesus. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the church at Ephesus. And after he warns them and encourages them, he says, if you don't repent, I'm going to come and I'm going to remove my lampstand from among you. And that's a very powerful image. And I think about that sometimes. What is a church without a lampstand? Do they exist today? You better believe it. There are some churches that God has come and he's removed the lampstand, which represents what? His presence, the light of his presence, the power of his Spirit, right? And he told the church there, if you don't repent, if you don't change, if you keep going the way you're going, eventually you're going to be a church without any spiritual power. My presence will have long since left. Your doors might still be open. You might still be meeting every week. You might still be holding classes and doing some ministries. But it's a really important thing to think about, and a really sad state when a church has lost its lampstand. And I wonder about that. I know of some church situations, and I wonder, man, does that church, is the Spirit even there anymore? Is God even in what they're doing? And I think it's a very apt analogy, because sometimes when that person we see in the ventilator is doing all the work for them, the breath is gone. Sometimes in these situations is very similar, right? The Spirit is gone, but the ventilator of our work and our effort and our, persistence and our human ability is the only thing that's keeping this thing propped up. God has long since abandoned that situation, but we just keep pouring and pouring and pouring into it with human effort, absent of any spiritual power. And so the thing survives, but it no longer thrives. Does that make sense? When we were before we unified here, and we had launched out from the church we were at before and started the new congregation, and a big thing that precipitated the leaving and the launching out was we actually did a several months long study in this great book. It's by Thomas Rainier, called The Autopsy of a Deceased Church. And if you're, it's a great study, even if you think your church is alive and healthy, just to know the warning signs, so that you don't become unhealthy and die. But just a fantastic book. And we worked through that. We went through that study. We tried to, salvage some things and bring some life back to this dying situation. But hey, it wasn't to be. And so eventually we moved on, and God blessed us to be here and be where we're at. But a few of the chapter titles I just want to put on your heart. We're not going to go all into it right now, but this is a good example of the spirit being gone from a church and the ventilator of human effort, absent of God, keeping it propped up. So one thing, one of the chapter headings is the past is the hero, right? We're living on our former glory, and it's all about what we used to do and how it used to be and back then and I remember when, and it's not anything about what's going on now, what God is doing now, how we're moving now. The past is all we can fixate on, and that's our only claim to fame. Another chapter title was the preference-driven church. You heard about the book, The Purpose-Driven Church, right? The preference-driven church, what we want, right? People get to arguing and debating about personal preferences and opinions and what's going to make me what I want. Another one was the budget moved inwardly, right? Instead of an outward focus, the budget is all geared toward keeping the members happy, us doing stuff, keeping our club going, right? Our little social club going, right? Another one was the church obsessed over the facilities. All right, the building becomes a sacred cow, and you can't change this and you can't change that, and if we do change, we end up arguing and falling out about every little change we want to make, right? Because things have become a sacred cow. One thing that, and God will give you some signposts along the way, but one thing I knew it was time to go from that other situation. There was this, I'm just going to call it what it was. It was hideous. It was this flower fixture thing up on the wall, and we got to get that down. We got to get something else up there. That's one of the first things visitors see when they come in, and it is not attractive. And we could not move that thing because of who made it and whose family that member was, and it was just, I thought I was going to get disfellowship just for suggesting that we take it down and do something different with that space. But again, that's a glaring red flag. That's a symptom that our focus has shifted from the spiritual to the carnal and is more about preserving sacred cows than it is about what's best now and what's going to help us move forward in the best way. All right? So that's a big one there. Any thoughts on that before I get this next one? Okay? Here's another sign it may be time to pull the plug. The life support has ceased to be an act of service, and it has become an act of selfishness. And again, even relating it to our loved ones in the physical sense, right? When somebody's in that bed and they're on life support, it becomes a really thin line between, helping this person and doing what's best for them, as opposed to just doing what's best for us, making us feel good about them still being here, right? Us not wanting to let go. And at a certain point, you're not helping the person anymore. This is just for you, right? Yeah, it's crossed over from serving them to an act of selfishness.
You could think about pets, your pets,
Mm-hmm.
Pet,
Yeah.
pet is suffering.
Right.
But, I've been through that, cause this dog that I know.
Yeah.
And, it's, how much, what is the best for you? Is it worth, you don't want to see them suffer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. At a certain point, it's more about us than them. So I'm going to give you a few self-check questions tonight for this one. Psalm 139, write this down. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Because again, it says, search me, O God, right? Look into my head and my heart and my spirit. See whether there's any false or wicked way, right? This idea of giving God permission to look within us and expose it to us. He gonna look anyway, right? He sees and knows anyhow. But what Psalm 139 is the psalmist opening up to God and giving him permission to search me and show me what you find, right? If I am wrong, show me. If there is something in me, if my motives are off, correct me, God. I think I'm right. I think I'm good. I think I'm thinking straight. But Lord, I always give your Spirit permission to search me, convict me, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay? So here's a few self-check questions along that line. Am I just holding on to this thing because of the personal benefits I gain from keeping it going? That's a good one, right? It might be a financial thing. It might be some emotional validation, but sometimes the only reason we're keeping stuff propped up, we're continuing this ministry, we're continuing to do this thing, is because of the personal benefits. And I know if I let it die, I'm not going to get my check anymore. If I let it go, I'm not going to get whatever I've been getting for a while. All right? So that's a selfish thing. It's not in service to the kingdom. It's not in service to God anymore. That's just you doing something that benefits you.
Will you read that question one more time?
Am I just holding on to this thing because of the personal benefits I gain from keeping it going? So here's another one. Another good self-check question. Am I just holding on to this thing so I don't look bad or appear to be a failure to others? Okay? Sometimes we don't want to give up on something. We don't want to bury it because we feel like that would be admitting failure, right? Or I'll look bad to other people, or I'll look like I didn't succeed at what I was doing. And again, that's a selfish motive. That's got nothing to do with kingdom. That's got nothing to do with God and his will and the direction the Spirit might be trying to move you. That's just you. Third one. Am I just holding on to this thing as a comfort zone that lets me check a box of accomplishment? Okay? So it's not really doing anything anymore, but it lets me say I'm doing something, right? It's no longer a challenge or a sacrifice. There's no growth personally coming from it. It's not really a service or a blessing to the kingdom, but is just an easy thing for me to do so that I can say I'm doing something, so that I can say I'm working for the church or I'm serving the Lord, right? But if it's just a comfort zone thing and it's just an easy thing to do to check a box, that's just a selfish motive. All right, next one. I think I got like 5 of these. This is number 4. Am I just holding on to this thing out of pride because it was my idea or my pet project? Right? Don't we do that sometimes, right? We won't let it go. We won't let it go ahead and die. We won't let it kick the bucket because it was my idea. That's pride, right? That's ego. Next one. Am I just holding on to this thing to prove a point to somebody or to show that I'm right?
Would that go along with being, you don't want to have to admit you were wrong or something?
Yep, exactly. I'm not going to admit that I was wrong. And again, our thinking, I think, has to shift, right? It's not even necessarily that you're wrong. It's just that this isn't the right thing at the right time anymore. It may have been when it started. It may have been when the ministry was initiated, but things change. God shifts his activity. Circumstances change, right? So it may have been the right thing then, but it might not be the right thing now.
Please forgive me.
That's okay. And that's all right. So we don't have to prove a point to anybody. And I think the last one here, am I just holding on to it out of a misguided sense of personal or family legacy? Like that flower arrangement I was talking about, right? That's just a misguided sense of family legacy, right? Our family did that for the church, so we're going to leave it there. Our family started this ministry, so you better not stop it. You better not ever end it. You better not ever change it. That's misguided. It's selfish. It's childish kind of too, right? It's spiritually immature. And if that's the only reason, it's not a good enough reason, right?
I think another thing that we hold on to, especially when you're a young guy and then you have your first car, and as time go by, stuff go on, you're trying to fix it, and you say you don't want to let it take it, set it, or take it to run off because you have so many good memories.
Yeah, and a lot of stuff invested in it too, right? I've got time and money and energy invested in this, and so a lot of times we won't let things go because of that investment. And we feel like if I stop, if I let it go, then my investment is just lost or I did all that in vain. No, not necessarily. Like we said, it served its purpose, it did its thing, and it's okay to move on to the next thing. That's just ego, right? When you can't let go because of what you've put in, what I've done, and I've put so much into this, and I've done this ministry for so many years, and I put so much of my blood, sweat, and tears into this ministry. Okay, great, thank you. But if you only did it for your glory, guess what God says? You already got your reward. You got the praise, you got the appreciation that you wanted. You patted yourself on the back. So don't look for any reward from God. Make sure your motives are right. Right? So if you're holding on, make sure you're holding on for a kingdom reason and not a selfish one. And so last but not least here's our third sign. It may be time to pull the plug. The situation has become unresponsive to all forms of spiritual stimuli. Right? That situation with the previous church. We tried praying, we tried fasting, and there was a cluster. I started to call them a coven. That's not the nicest word, but hey, it might be right. There was a cluster that wouldn't do any of that stuff. Right? We're trying to hear from the Lord. We're trying to humble ourselves and pray for God's restoration to heal this thing before it's too late. Right? Let's repair some things before it goes too far. And this one faction wouldn't even participate in any of that stuff, right? And so I think when the spiritual stimuli doesn't work, write this down, Matthew chapter 10, verse 14, right? Jesus says, when they won't hear you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. So write Matthew 10, 14 down, but also put in your notes verses 7 and 8. And when you have a minute, back up to verse 7 and 8, and you'll realize that Jesus tells them, look, you're going to preach the word and cast out demons, heal the sick, do all these miracles, and show all these people the power of God. And still, with all of that, some still won't receive your message. Some towns you go to, with all of that, everything you're going to show them by the power of the Spirit will still find a way to dismiss it. They'll still find a way to reject you. All right? And when you come to that place, when you come to that situation, when you come to that relationship, when you come to that church situation, whatever it is, right? When the power of God isn't even enough to prick some hardened hearts and to move some people and to allow him to break down some of their strongholds, listen, I ain't got nothing for you. if you won't listen to him, I know I'm saving my breath. You know, so when the situation becomes unresponsive to all spiritual stimuli, then it might be time to pull the plug. So when you're praying and people won't pray with you, right? When you're trying to study and get clarity, and the people you're trying to work with won't study with you, okay, you're not even spiritually attuned right now. Okay. So that's it for tonight. We'll wrap up. We're a little bit over, but I wanted to go ahead and finish that up tonight. So again, just with this whole series, not telling you what to do and when to do it definitively, cut this off, stop that, remove yourself from that person. I'm just encouraging you and hopefully equipping you with this study to have more discernment, right? To really be good stewards of the things that God has given us, not casting our pearls before swine, not pouring into empty cups, not beating dead horses, right? God he deserves better than that. So let's make sure we're pouring into the things that are bearing fruit. Before we close, Ken is asking prayer for Linda tonight. She had a fall last night, and she's at Hurley, cracked rib and hip, so she's in a bad way right now. So let's keep our sister Linda in prayer and keep her lifted up. Anything else before we wrap up? Yep.
Mom and I are going to be leaving next Tuesday, and we'll be traveling for about 3 weeks. So, do some prayer.
Okay.